If you can't figure out how to form teams, if you can't figure out how to build backlogs, if you can't figure out how to produce working tested software, then getting to that point is the work of the transformation. Okay? Now, as you start to think about scaling this kind of stuff, right, now we're having a different conversation at scale. We're talking about what is your team-based organizational structure all the way up the stack and out to the different groups, because we want collaboration and teamwork every place we can possibly get it. We want a governance model that's going to feed work into that system in a way that, that promotes agility rather than reduces agility. Governance is kind of a big, heavy word, but all it means is how are we going to make economic trade-offs in the face of uncertainty? Typically, there's kind of lean constructs, Kanban-based constructs, batch sizing strategies that you can do to do some really cool agile and adaptive governance kind of work. And then lastly, the idea of metrics and tools. Almost every large-scale organization is going to need some way to prove that it's making progress. One of the things that you can't do is use team velocity as a proxy for performance when you've got multiple teams that have to come together on an integrated deliverable. You have to have some way of measuring and controlling across teams to see how integrated features and epics are pulling together. There's 4 basic categories of teams that I tend to think about in terms of a structure. There's typically shared services teams, component teams. I know we'd like them not to exist, but they do and they will. Okay. There's your typical prototypical Scrum feature teams, right? That's the next level up. And then what I call program teams, sometimes I call them product owner teams, sometimes I'll call them requirements clearinghouses. We use all kinds of different words. But there's usually something at scale in the presence of dependencies that is a coordinating entity that basically does look ahead, manages cross-cutting concerns, resolves dependencies before the teams get them. Right? So it's a pattern. And that pattern gets implemented all kinds of different ways. SAFe has a way of implementing it. I've done it 10 different ways over the last 8 years, probably more than that, okay? But there's a pattern of coordination that happens at the program level that is pretty much essential in the presence of dependencies. There's typically some sort of team that rides across the top that does prioritization decisions, makes the economic trade-offs, right, that kind of stuff. So at the different levels of the organization, what we're gonna have is we're gonna have different kinds of teams to do different functions within the system. I want teams everywhere. They're not all going to be Scrum teams, right? They're not all going to deliver a user story at the end of the sprint, right? But we want teamwork and collaboration at all levels, right? We want to reduce latency and reduce handoffs. And so what that tends to look like as you start to scale up are groups of teams down at the bottom that provide shared services, groups of feature teams. At the program level, you might be organizing around value streams or product lines, or there's all kinds of different things you can organize around at that level. There's some typical coordination body that lives at that level. That level is subordinate to the portfolio teams at the top, okay? So you start to take these base patterns and you start to think about how do I create collaboration at every level, and how do I start to think about, and I know hierarchy is kind of a bad word here, but like a hierarchical relationship, a flow between strategy and execution, and a feedback loop across that stack, okay? So that's the basic pattern that we're kind of looking at.
If we look at our governance model, this 4-tier governance model, one of the first things to really get clear about is this word governance is overloaded in a lot of organizations. A lot of people look at governance as being, what artifacts do you need to complete? What are the behaviors? What are the checklists you need to turn in? To be really clear, the governance model here is shifting from controlling handoffs and accountability for artifacts to getting the organization to focus on the flow of value, trying to create intentionality around who's involved in which conversations when, and designing the delivery so that we're going to get the most value produced as possible. We also do these team designs, who's on the portfolio team, who's on the product team, who's on the delivery team, so that as they're operating, as the work flows through their tier in the governance model, they have the right people in the room to have the right conversation. So the team design, interacting with the governance model, focused on the flow of value and managing those 5 categories of risk are what our governance model and our team design does. When we're talking about the system of delivery, that's what we're driving towards. I'm going to do a simple walkthrough of the 3-tier governance model to show how work flows through there. And then I'm going to break down a little bit more detail where each of these 5 categories of risk are handled. So here's a 3-tier version of the governance model. The portfolio team gets an epic. It might come in collaboration with the product team. It might come from outside the organization, but an epic starts in portfolio alignment. In conversation with the product team and the intake stuff, we're focused on getting agreement. Is this the next most important thing to work on? And is this a problem that we actually need to solve, and do we understand the problem? That epic then moves across to portfolio prioritization based on a high-level estimate and all the other things that are in the pipeline and our current capacity. Is this the next most important thing to start breaking down for the organization? As that epic moves over to solution definition, we begin to decompose it down into detailed features, the changes we're actually going to introduce into the organization to achieve the outcome that's defined in the epic. As capacity starts to become available to do those features, we'll move the features into release planning. So here you see 2 features in release planning, and we're breaking the stories in those features down to begin to make them ready. The epic has been targeted for release. We have an idea about when we're going to deliver it, and we're starting to now interact with the team to break the stories down. As we start to finish stories and get stories ready for consumption, once all the stories in a feature are ready, that feature moves over to feature ready, and we can actually start building that epic. Here we see an epic in process, and the delivery team is building the stories, finishing up all the stories within it, moving that to done, and you see that feature moves over to feature validation while the stories are finished. We have all the features moving over. When all the features are completed, we validate the epic, and the epic moves to completed. So there's a couple of important things here. One is we're trying to move work intact through this process. We're not starting writing every single feature on day one and delivering them on the last day. So there's some importance to the order, the sequencing of these features. Also, by having the work visible like this and having our cadence of meetings and clarity of roles, we know what it means to be done with portfolio prioritization before we start writing code. We're not starting to code and we'll figure out the problems as we go and resolve them in real time, because that's just not pragmatically possible to do in large, complex organizations.
How do we actually know that we've truly improved the business? We have metrics, and we have metrics at each level of our overall governance structure. So at a product team level, we are measuring many things, and it's the traditional things that we would expect to see as part of an Agile team. At Leading Agile, we believe that it's not just about the activities. It's not about checking the box and having an activity plan. I'm going to do all of these activities. I'm going to do a training session on stand-up meetings. I'm going to improve the quality of my retrospectives. That's all really good stuff. But what works for one team might not work for another team. We're actually measuring the outcomes. How do we actually know that our activities are having value, that our activities are helping to move the needle, and how well our teams are doing to really achieve the business benefits that we're after to improve the quality of the business? At a program team level, our program team members are accountable for continuously reducing cycle time, for making sure that none of the features are blocked, and in addition to that, looking at the rework and the number of defects that are created. Cycle time is one of the ones that we spend the most time talking about, because you heard me say earlier that within our program teams, we are continuously holding those program team members accountable for continuously improving the flow of value through the system. There is an expectation that the amount of value delivered this year will be greater than the amount of value delivered last year with the same number of resources. We spend a lot of time playing the Kanban game. For those of you that have played the Kanban game and understanding how does value really flow through a system and how do we increase the flow of value, the very mechanics of what that looks like to do that. So we're really anchoring, and everything is really embedded in those customer metrics. And from a metrics perspective at a program team level, not only are we measuring cycle time, not only are we looking at defects to see are the teams actually improving in terms of their quality, but we're also looking at how well is that product or product line or product group actually performing in the marketplace. Are we actually getting better as a result of our efforts? And this is something that I spend a lot of time looking at, and we actually have dedicated coaches. We have program team coaches who are 100% dedicated to coaching that program team how to really increase the value that they're delivering, how to really meaningfully move the move the needle on those specific metrics to increase the value that the customers are delivering.